And it is a big welcome to our panel this week. She is the head of social for DD Group Australia, Carolee Evans. Welcome back.
Thank you.
And he is the editor of CNET Australia, Seamus Byrne. Welcome back to Download.
Thanks for having me.
Don't forget, you can tweet along with the show live. The hashtag is Download This Show. I'd love to know your thoughts, particularly about data retention. Because when is a website not a website? Well, apparently when George Brandis attempts to describe it on national TV.
The web address is part of the metadata.
The website.
The web address. The electronic address of the website.
That is the sound of Attorney General George Brandis in something of a car crash interview trying to explain to Sky News' David Spears what exactly it is that they're planning on retaining as part of the government's new plans to keep your metadata. And Seamus, there is an ancient proverb: never bring an Attorney General to a tech fight. What exactly is it that they are talking about retaining? Because people hear the idea of all of your data being kept and your mind instantly goes to 1984. But there's a very specific list of things that they want to get.
They are still not being very clear about what they're planning on collecting. And this is part of the problem at this point. A big part of it is they're saying they just want to be able to keep getting the information that they currently get, in the sense that already there are about, I think the latest stat was about 330,000 warrantless requests for metadata took place in 2012, 2013. So, yeah, they can already do a lot of this stuff. The big difference is that they're saying, well, things are changing and maybe the telcos won't keep this information anymore. So we just want to legislate to make sure they keep what we already have access to. That kind of collection, which is really about the numbers to and from each other and the location in which the calls were made, as well as the length of time that the call was made. That sort of stuff is fairly basic when you talk about that information versus what was said on the conversation. But when you start talking about the web and internet traffic, metadata is a completely different beast, and this is what all the companies are starting to worry about, of how much they're going to have to do. Metadata
is kind of a vague concept. Can somebody walk me through exactly what are the sorts of things that would be included in the metadata we're talking about here?
When you make a request to a website or to a service, then, there's a little packet of data that goes back and forth that kind of starts that process. And then, content really is kind of just mashed together with metadata in a lot of ways these days. If you're sending out a tweet, there's actually more metadata attached to that tweet than actual content.
Time, location, where you were, all these sorts of things that you don't necessarily associate with your 140 characters actually goes out with that tweet as well.
Yeah.
And so that's on the table as content in the broader scheme of metadata that could be collected?
Brandis has said regarding social media that that's still up for discussion. Now, my gut feel is that because most social media platforms are US-based and offshore, that they don't know how they can get or legislate to get social media metadata, because there's a whole other complexity of it's not our servers that are holding those elements. That's my gut feel as to why he doesn't know or doesn't have clarity.
And part of the reason why this is so unclear is because the legislation is really up for discussion. It was announced as part of a raft of counter-terrorism measures, about $600 million worth of new funding, and they said they would start to look into it. They're in principle in favour of the examination.
The really important point here is that Australians need to become informed, and they need to understand the difference between a government requiring a warrant to access data because they have a hypothesis or because they're investigating something, versus the government just putting out a massive bloody net for 2 years and capturing trillions of data, and then, whatever they feel or however they want to just go in and get this one and this one. So I think there's a big difference, and I think I would encourage particularly listeners and watchers now of this program to go and read people like Stilgari and Dan Nolan, Gordy Guy, CNET, become informed, understand what the difference is and understand what the implications are, and then say how you feel about it.
The mere act of keeping this information, having it stored, creates its own risks, though, don't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is, as iNet's pointed out, so they do about 15% of all Australian traffic. They're the third biggest ISP. They've pointed out about 3 petabytes of data travels across their network every day. So that's thousands of terabytes or millions of gigabytes, depending on which kind of frame of reference you prefer. But they're saying that about 1 petabyte of that, so about a third of all of that traffic, is technically metadata, and that if they were being forced to retain that information, then they're essentially needing to scrape out the content because it does all sort of flow through together these days. And comparing that to the mobile networks where they, bill by phone calls once upon a time, and they're changing that. Like ISPs have only ever had to say this much traffic crossed our network from you. They've never had to actually retain anything about exactly what type of traffic it was. So when you think 2 years worth of 1 petabyte of data a day, we're talking like heading towards an exabyte to get to the, what goes beyond petabyte.
My mind boggling as we speak.
Yeah, so like this is the kind of data they're being told, and yet we've had Abbott and Brandis saying, well, we're not asking them to collect anything they don't already collect. It's like, no, you absolutely are asking them to do that. And suddenly that becomes a massive pool of data that some people would be very interested in trying to get their hands on.
I think then there's also the beautiful irony at the moment that these providers will have to pass on the costs of storing that data. So Australians will pay for the right to have their freedom taken away by this government. The same departmental and the same AFP and advisors are asking for this. So I think it was eventual or inevitable that Abbott will come out with something like this. And the Turnbull factor is simply that, 3 years ago he might have had a say or some influence in the party, and now he's just a little media frontman.
And the big risk here in political terms is actually that, this was originally Labor's idea. Is Labor just going to say, actually, we believe in data retention, and therefore the two major parties will just kind of put this through together? Because this really isn't something that's a good idea in any way. Literally, this even includes, government agencies like, the RSPCA, or apparently like Victorian Taxis and Bankstown Council. Like all these people have used warrantless access to metadata already. When you talk about metadata, you're talking about this quick way of saying, well, can we just check like who is 2 steps removed from that guy who made a phone call because he's a bit dodgy. Let's check everybody that he's called in the last 2 years, and then let's check everybody that all those people have called in the last 2 years. Suddenly you spread an incredibly wide net. You start to just get into this kind of ridiculous overanalysis, which really does then just build this whole guilt by association that just goes way too far and very easily way too quickly.
Marketers, Coles, are launching financial services where they're going to now tie credit cards and loans and home loans to your purchasing behaviour because they can track if you shop during the day or on weekends and buy fruit and veg, then you're a much better insurance risk than people who shop late at night buying pasta and carbohydrates. I mean, that's the type of metadata that from a commercial world is really driving a lot of the predictive marketing, big data marketing. So my question is, what's the parameters? Is there a way that these providers can commercialise to try and recoup the costs, or is it completely just for the government, or where are the parameters?
All right, we'd like to know, what are your questions when the government is examining data retention? What are the things that you as an internet user really want to know? Let us know in the comment section down below. We are in the studio with the head of social for DDB Group Australia, Carolee Evans, and the editor of CNET Australia, Seamus Byrne. My name is Mark Fennell, and in the last 2 years, we've seen a string of allegations of sexism in the tech industry, and for decades, a certain stereotype of a male geek overlord has prevailed, but a group of Melbourne women are determined to make changes in the way we view geeky culture. Fascinating to note, Carolee, how common are these kind of events?
There's events and there are associations in almost every state and territory in this country, and then globally they're all over. So they are common. They're just not, as high profile, or there's not a lot of publicity around them.
They're on Radio National now.
Well, this is a great start. Putting on my very, very serious hat, it is absolutely fantastic to hear women taking and empowering themselves and taking the initiative. I think this issue of women in tech is one that is covered in systemic sexism. It is a really yucky area. But then in saying that, it is not just isolated to tech. This is a part of a wider problem about the inequality of women in every industry. I was just listening to Pine on 7:30 Report, where he made mention of the higher ed changes and referred to women as simply being teachers and nurses in university, and the men were the lawyers and doctors. It's things like that gender bias, where I think this group of women rather, are absolutely fantastic, and I salute them. It's not that there aren't enough women. There's that white male geeky culture, and I'm sorry to stereotype, but there is, and I think that it's perpetuated by everything else outside of tech. Toys are genderfied. Women don't have equal pay. Pine saying that women only go to university
The Bachelor exists at all.
Well, goodness me, I didn't watch that, and I saw tweets about that, and I'm really glad I didn't watch that.
It's the nation's annual orgy of sexism. It's interesting that you point that out. A guy named Arthur Chu a couple of months ago, who won Jeopardy in the United States, very self-professed massive nerd. He got up and he wrote this amazing piece, I think, for the Daily Beast, about the fact that not only does the tech industry have a sexism problem, but there's this meta narrative folded into every piece of major tech, geeky pop culture, that a young guy who may be nerdy or weedy does X, Y, Z, and then gets the girl as a gift for whatever he does. And they may not necessarily be inherently negative stories, but that meta narrative that if you do the right things, a woman is a gift to you at the end, is something that rides through, everything from the Big Bang Theory right up to most games as well.
Yeah, guys in tech and tech industry is very closely linked to gaming culture, Marvel, comics, all of that. I mean, they are intertwined. Marvel has not had one movie with a female lead.
Yeah, they've got a movie with a talking raccoon with a machine gun, but no female lead.
But it is a self-fulfilling prophecy when the entire culture doesn't have women in strong positions. So then you can understand why boys coming into this area and into tech are just completely surrounded by the notion that women are not equal and women are rewards, but women are something to play around with.
Yeah. I mean, just yesterday, Michelle Starr on CNET, she just wrote a great piece talking to a bunch of people in the games industry about, it's come up a lot recently about, female protagonists, being able to play the lead character as a female. And she talked to a whole bunch of people about it. And one of the big things was, that they kind of kept coming back to was, that there's people in the industry who they're almost surprised by the fact that there's pushback when they do just make yet another, white male guy as the lead character, because they're genuinely just being oblivious to it. And it's exactly that thing of they're not even seeing, I guess, that people are reacting to it because it is just so dominated by those kinds of guys that they're like, well, you're making a game. It's got a guy that runs around and shoots people. Like, what's the problem? There were plenty of guys who are just gamers who are sort of saying, I enjoy playing female protagonists, this isn't something that's going to scare off guys, where there's plenty of good games in history. The classic kind of with Metroid, one of the, the very old school Nintendo games that kind of used a nice reveal of somebody in in an armored kind of suit. At the end of the game, it's revealed that it was a female. And it's always been one of these nice touch points to kind of go back to the thing of, the first time people played that, they probably were just making their own assumptions. And to get to the end and go, oh, it actually didn't matter, and there's so many good examples that it just makes the generic kind of norm just look bad.
What are the best examples you guys have seen of people, companies, organisations trying to redress the balance, trying to make sure that there is a step towards equality in the geek world and the tech world? Are there really good examples out there that you guys have seen?
Yeah, look, this is an issue that is becoming more and more close to my heart because I'm going to do a little bit of a work plug that DDB Group have just taken on the WGEA, which is an organisation seeking to reduce the pay gap and improve equality for women in every industry. The average pay gap in Australia is 17.5%. That means that women in this country get paid 17.5% lower than men in exact same roles. There are a lot of great examples of companies that are seeking to change this. Most companies don't know that there's a problem. They don't know that and when I say they don't know, they haven't realised that there is not a female on their board. There is not female in upper management, that the females have pay gaps startups. So once they get told that, or they're shown that, and it's quite an exhaustive audit to go through, a light bulb switches and they go, oh my God, that is absolutely terrible. I cannot believe that. Let's change it. From big business through to tiny little businesses, from tech industry through to advertising, Silicon Valley, people are, once they become aware of it, they then immediately seek to change it. But then there's some examples of companies that are just not doing it well, and they're the big ones, they're the small ones, they're the startups in Silicon Valley. They're perpetuating the culture that tech in particular is a man's arena. There was a really funny scene in the series Silicon Valley, which is the
great comedy
satirical
show from HBO, yeah.
about the whole tech industry, and they were going to TechCrunch's Disrupt,
Yeah.
and where the booths were, and the female character had said, normally there's 5% women in this in the industry, and don't get distracted because there's now 15% women.
There's an amazing interview with the guys that created that show where they want to address the specific issue of sexism in the second series of that show, and they said the most sexist shot in the entirety of the first season was the shot of the audience at this big conference, TechCrunch Disrupt, which is just 100% male. And they're like, and that's not a shot that we cast. That's actually a shot of TechCrunch Disrupt. We didn't cast it that way. That's the reality of it. I think it's an interesting space for those guys to touch on. Given we are having this conversation about the role of women in technology, I wanted to take this opportunity to see if we could celebrate one or two or three women in technology that really should be regarded as being important leaders. In addition to obviously acknowledging that there is a problem, I thought it'd be nice if we actually pointed out that there are people that have changed the shape of technology. So who is your nomination, Seamus Byrne?
I think Hedy Lamarr is an awesome example of women in tech because she's most widely known as, a Hollywood star from that sort of early period of like glamorous kind of studio system Hollywood, but that she was also an inventor and created the spectrum shifting system that actually led to the fact that we have wireless communication and we had radar systems and that whole like military application at the time of being able to kind of track, friend or foe type radar systems, the early era. But that sort of spectrum hopping concept led to literally the way wireless communication works right now, and the ability to sort of swap between cell towers, all that sort of stuff was based on a technology she created. And I just love that, that she is somebody who on one level would absolutely be looked at as just this sort of, gorgeous Hollywood starlet who therefore probably wasn't very clever, but actually was completely instrumental in creating the modern era that we now enjoy.
Awesome. Carolee, your nomination?
Do you know my nomination is for the hundreds of women that we don't know the names of that are in this industry that don't, maybe they haven't done anything that, is changed the world, but they're changing the world every day. And I think that, certainly the women in my development team at DDB are amazing, and I love them and I celebrate and salute them and them all over the country.
Who are the women in technology that should be separated? Ada Lovelace, Marissa Meyer from Yahoo, Sheryl Sandberg from Facebook, whoever you want. Who should we be celebrating? Let us know on Twitter. The hashtag is Download This Show. And finally, here on Download This Show, Friendster, Bebo, MySpace, Second Life. It just seemed like it was going to be one of those dead social networks that just never went anywhere. Of course, we are talking about Second Life. And back in 2003, Second Life was this sort of amazing hit in its own way. It was a completely three-dimensional real world. It had real-world purchases in it. It certainly kind of preempted a lot of the behaviours we now emulate in places like Facebook and to some extent Twitter. But then it just kind of disappeared. There was a period where people were spending, I kid you not, hundreds of thousands of dollars to build islands in this 3D social network, and then it disappeared.
Even the ABC had an island, didn't it? Not hundreds of thousands, but they had an island.
They definitely spent some money on building an island, and I'm sure a Senate estimate somewhere has catalogued exactly how much they spent. I wouldn't care to go back down and look at that list. But it was interesting to note this week that there are apparently 1 million people still using Second Life. And apparently there is life in it yet. And one of the things that might be driving that is a deal that they've done with Oculus Rift. Now, Oculus Rift are the virtual reality headsets that you can put on there. They're quite cheap. What exactly can you do with Oculus Rift and Second Life, Seamus Byrne?
that doesn't immediately go to the online sex type discussions.
Now this is my type of discussion.
Well, what a surprise. There is a running joke amongst listeners who download this show that every episode has to have Facebook, every episode has to have reference to sex of some kind.
It's usually when I'm on.
Yeah, there is that theme that develops. So to walk us through it, James.
Look, I think everybody loves it. Certainly Oculus Rift is perfectly suited for being able to explore and move through genuine 3D environments. The idea of, I guess, you might sit in a, rotating office chair so that you can basically turn around and kind of look in whatever direction you like and walk around. That's, quite an easy possibility for something you could do with a world like Second Life. I mean, I really quickly moved to the whole idea of why you'd sort of specifically want to go back to something that has quite comparatively sort of low resolution graphics, and it's kind of based on a very old engine when there's incredibly beautiful modern engines you could do that with. But that is absolutely what can be done. And seeing some of the articles recently that are talking about, why people are still in Second Life, there is a very dancing centric kind of culture to Second Life now, it seems. Everybody loves going in and people actually do motion capture for their characters in the game, or you can buy other people's motion captured moves to apply them to your own body in the game.
Immersive virtual reality, which is what Second Life with Oculus Rift is. It's a really interesting human behaviour because from my perspective, I am seeing that with a lot of the negative news, the world is really a sad and angry place at the moment. So this escapism and this virtual world where people can, if they can't dance in real life, they'll just buy someone else's, virtual dance moves and apply it to their character. This notion that they can escape, and they were always there. It's not that a new million people have come into Second Life. It's the people that were there when it was, when ABC had an island, when brands, Coca-Cola and all that had islands. But they're just there living a better preferred life from their perspective.
I think there's also an element to Second Life that's maintained a lot of people's interest was always that they were willing to, in a very kind of real economic sense, sell you a chunk of the world. And you could then build things in that made money, that sort of let you, create encounters for people to come and have experiences, and they could pay rent to come and sort of, have fun times in the thing that you'd created. So I think, whereas we often talk about, say, in, games like World of Warcraft, which has now been around for 10 years, we talk about investment in a character. When you've built up this thing and you've done it a lot, people feel quite invested in the time that they've spent there. I think in a Second Life context, people feel like they've made a genuine investment in a real sense, and it's something that they can get back, while at the same time having that sort of, there's a community there that they're still a part of. I think there's a mild element of sadness in some of it because it is such an expansive world. And people have built so many different things that there's not many central hubs in Second Life at the moment that seem to draw big crowds like they used to. But that's part of finding the events to go to and things. But there seems to be a lot of people when they go and explore it, you just find the odd one person or two people here and there having little conversations, but it's a little more Spartan and or sparse in terms of people than it once was.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I've read that some people have really struggled to leave. They're then needing to go to counselling about extracting themselves and then re-immersing into the real world as we know it. It's this really interesting area that I can understand that, from an escapism, from a building your own empire, from acting out either financially or emotionally or for whatever reason you can't do it in the real world. I think when brands were there, that's when I think it was a really icky place in terms of it was just mimicking real life in a virtual where capitalism, commercialism was all there. But now brands sort of, the shine left and brands went off to Candy Crush and Farmville and Twitter. But now it's just the people and they're just there acting out what they want to do.
How would you build it if we were launching it in 2014 as opposed to 2003?
I don't know if I would do anything particularly different to what they're doing right now in terms of maybe from graphics and actually modernising the technology and the experience. But I think with Oculus Rift, you can completely understand why the benefit and where people would want to go there and spend, hours upon hours upon hours playing. I don't know what you say. Do you say playing? Do you
I
say
guess so.
living there?
Immersed.
Yeah,
I mean,
exploring.
because that's really
Exploring.
its distinctive factor from
Yeah.
everything else. Everything is about taking the technology, folding it into real life. What this is about is it's about subsuming you into its world.
The technology is facilitating a virtual experience. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of like skins and things in Second Life that are bad graphics, that aren't well designed and things. And that for me personally kind of puts me off kind of walking into those kinds of spaces, because I'm like, if I'm in a virtual world, I want to enjoy the kind of, really feel like I'm immersed in something quite beautiful, because we can construct beautiful things in computers in that sort of way. And on one level, it reminds me a lot of, the metaverse as a concept in Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash, because there's certain elements of it that are very just hard geometric kind of concepts. People can build things easily in very kind of sharp and kind of clinical kinds of ways, and that can kind of create certain environments, and then other people are kind of making things more elaborate. That it is partly about reflecting the kind of the people and the way that they're moving through these worlds. But for me, I'm like, as a user, I want to feel like there's better engines, better tools available for a user to make something that is beautiful, not just like it looks like a GIF has been thrown on the wall of a building and it's really ugly.
What would be awesome? Imagine if you just turn Second Life into, how would the world, like, let's do it for this year, we're going to do it without any form of capitalism. The next year we're going to do it without, governments, and then just roll out different ways that maybe humanity could reinvent itself, and then find the one that works, and then roll it out in real life.
Isn't that already what Facebook does with you? They're constantly running experiments on your mood and things like
Yeah,
that.
they're doing mood experiments, but mood's only just one tiny thing. Like, how could you? I mean, Facebook, I don't think after that little PR exercise will do that again.
No, or at least not publicise it.
Publicise it in any form of scientific paper. But I think that they don't have the natural behaviour and the way that people are acting out worlds like Second Life does. So that'd be an interesting. If the Second Life people are listening, I'm in.
And actually, if the Second Life people are listening, we'd love to know, why is it you stayed? Why is it you stayed in that world? What's the appeal? We'd love to know. Let us know either on the Facebook page, Download This Show's Facebook page, or on Twitter. The hashtag is Download This Show. And we are out of time. Very big thank you to our panel this week. He's the editor of CNET Australia, Seamus Byrne. Thanks for coming back.
Thank you.
And Carolee Evans from DDB Group Australia. Thanks for coming back again.
Thank you.
My name has been Mark Fennell, and thanks for watching another chunk of Download This Show.